So there's a couple of really crazy or strange narratives in this Abraham cycle. Both are the same, and you'd think Abraham would learn, where he keeps trying to sell his sister, or his wife as his sister, and keeps trying to say that, no, keep me safe. It almost sounds like it's something weird.
It sounds like a used car salesman to me sometimes.
So why did he do it? Why? Why is this in the narrative?
My personal opinion, unbiased, I think he thought he was smarter than God.
Okay.
He was a crafty individual. Always promoting himself, running ahead of God.
Okay.
Forcing God's will. What do you think?
I feel like maybe, well, I don't know. Maybe God put it in there to let us, because
Learn from.
well, and see that he can use imperfect people, because that really strikes me through this book.
Using imperfect people.
And I'm grateful for that.
Yeah.
That's good.
God uses cracked pots, right?
That knew when you said that.
Yeah.
Right.
What was God's response to when Abraham did that? You remember the narrative? We're not going to read it, but I think most of the time, what ended up happening at the end of it?
Well,
There's one in Genesis 12 and one in Genesis 20. The one with Pharaoh and the one with Abimelech.
Yeah. He always got sent away with more than he came in.
More than he came with. How weird is that? He's the one who lied and was unfaithful and everything, and both Pharaoh and Abimelech sent him away with tons of stuff. Say, here, take my money, leave. Right? It's just kind of weird. So what do you think is, you know me now, the Egyptian connection in here? Other than the obvious Pharaoh one, do you see any other Egyptian connection in this story?
There's got to be a connection there. If you just ask it, there's got to be a method to your madness. I know it. I just don't know what it is.
Yes, there does.
Well,
we're going to talk about that in a minute. But
it said he went there because there was a famine.
What does that remind you of?
Joseph's.
Yeah, Joseph's family went to Egypt. Egyptians, especially Coptic Christians in Egypt, call themselves the refuge of God's people. Whenever there are problems, they run to Egypt. Not only Abraham, but Joseph and Jacob and Jesus, Mary and Joseph. We are the refuge of God's people, they say. Now there's another one in the Isaac narrative, which we'll just touch on. Isaac does the same thing with the same name of a king. We don't believe it's the same king. Probably the next generation of Abimelech. Okay, it's a very common name, but Isaac does the same thing. Do you think there's a connection there between Abram and his son?
Probably, yeah.
Maybe a generational kind of sin or a generational kind of thing?
Yeah, a lot of similarities.
Yeah.
Well, it says the Bible would pass on our sins to our children sometimes, inadvertently or deliberately or unconsciously.
Yeah. All right, so we're going to pick apart this passage, and I'm going to dispel everything you just said.
All right, tell me where you're at.
All right, page 22. So just flip the page here. You're on 21 right there.
Okay.
So flip to page 22. In Genesis 12, verse 10 to 20, what we hear on the surface of this strange passage, on the surface. First we hear that Abraham left Canaan. Okay, Abraham lies about his wife. Abraham is insecure, scared, faithless, which doesn't sound like the father or the patriarch, right? Abraham cashes in on the deal, right? Trading sex with wife for goods. Abraham gets caught because of the sickness caused by this sin. Okay?
You mean God allows people to be sick because of sin?
Interesting. Okay, that's the surface kind of reading. That's kind of what we
Hollywood
what we're looking at, right? And then Genesis 20, which is the Abimelech version, what we hear on the surface in this strange passage, Abraham does it again. A second time, doesn't he learn? Right. Abimelech is the righteous one, and Abraham is not the righteous one. Abraham again shows insecurity, being scared, being faithless. And Abraham again cashes in on the deal. The whole chapter 20 is there. But there's a few questions that make you go, wait a minute. That's the surface reading of all of this, but there's something that makes you think, there's something a little deeper. Why would these passages be included in the narrative? Right? Again, if you, our whole point of this whole Sunday school, this whole series, is to figure out what they thought back then, and then translate that into something that we can apply to us today, right? What did they think of it back then? Why would that narrative be put in there? And you're going, it had to have some significance to the people back then. It had to. And how does this enhance the drama? Remember a couple weeks ago we talked about the drama of the narrative, that the drama builds up to the point of a climax, right? And then there may be a false answer with Isaac, but then, oh yeah, Abraham doesn't have to sacrifice Isaac, so yes, we have the, yay, Isaac is the right one. You know, that's the narrative we have here. This drama created by God saying, you will be a great nation, and you will have many, many children, right? But he's barren. So that builds the drama right up to the crisis, right up to the climax, right up to what we need. So how does this fit into that narrative? How does it enhance the drama?
It's pretty obvious, God's up to something.
Yeah, exactly. God is up to something. It's pretty obvious in here.
Yeah.
All right? So things that give you a sense that there is something else going on here. Now, if you stopped and just read the passages carefully, you'll get a sense that there's something else going on here, other than those two questions. You know, what would these why would they be included, and how do they enhance the drama? Was Sarah really that beautiful? Remember we talked about the change from ancient narrative to historic narrative. Ancient narrative is more tied to the study of God, on information about God. Now we're getting into the historical narrative where we're talking more about man and its relation to God. Okay? So, if you don't like the words, forgive me, but the ancient narrative is more mythological, whereas the new historical narrative that we're talking about with Abraham is more epic, right? There's a little sense of epic in here. Now, mythology, of course, talks about God. Epics talk about man and his relations to God, or it gives a story about man. So we're talking about Abraham here, this epic. And you're starting to get the sense that there's a historically real characters here, but they've added on this layer of epic. And when Sarah is so beautiful, when in the narrative, she's 75 years old.
Yeah. That's young, I'm 70.
You're going, wait a minute. You know, there's that little bit of epic nature, okay? Sarah may have been beautiful, and she may have been gorgeous, 20s, 30s, maybe even 40s, but 65 to 75, you're going, okay, that's that sense of epic. Again, Abraham to have a child at 100 is amazing.
Yeah.
For Abraham to have a child at 30 is nothing. So we say, in order to enhance the narrative, in order to say that how great God is and how amazing this promise is, Abraham to have a baby at 100, everybody's going, wow.
Yeah.
If God had promised Abraham when he was 30, you know, you're going to have a baby. Oh, okay, that's expected. I mean, at that time they had 10 to 12 children, and half of them would die, but they would have that many children, right? So you have this layer of epic on top of the historical narrative. Was Sarah really that beautiful? Wasn't she already in her 70s or 80s by that time? Doesn't the timeline of Abraham's life seem a little mixed up here? I mean, because he did this with Pharaoh, and then God granted him a son. It was after Isaac was born that he had the thing with Abimelech. And you go, okay, God already promised and all this. It just doesn't make sense. Okay? While it appears as unfaithfulness, there must be something else behind the event to show who Abraham is or to show who God is. Okay, now we had talked about it's good having this in here because God uses real people, right? Mm-hmm. But again, what did they think back then of their patriarch Abraham in Moses' time when Moses was relaying these stories to the people? What did they believe at that time? Okay, why would Abraham, and again to enhance that, why would Abraham be rewarded at the end of each of these? And the other ruler punished? It just doesn't make sense with your surface reading. Abraham's the one who lied, who proved himself unfaithful on the surface. And we're going, but he got rewarded. So what's the message there? Right? And then why two roughly identical stories? And then a third one with Isaac. So you get the sense, don't you, that there's something behind these narratives. There's something behind it that God's trying to tell us.
Yeah, we sometimes take things through. God has a way of showing up in a way different than our thinking. And God is God. He can do anything He wants. We're working under usual circumstances. What we think is the way it should be, it's not what God is.
Exactly. And again, my point in this whole series is that we need to dig below the surface. We need to find out what the intent is. Find out how God is working in the lives of Abraham. And in this narrative, if you remember again a couple of weeks ago, one of the points of this historical narrative in these cycles is to try to establish an identity for Israel. Who are we, Israel is asking during Moses' time. They're asking, who are we? And Moses is telling these stories to give them an identity. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, down into Egypt. He's giving these Hebrews, these people who are lost in the desert, he's giving them an identity of who they are. This is who they are. And right in league with that is who God is.
God's everything. We look for it.
Exactly.
That's fine.
So he's establishing an identity for Israel here. So the first one, again, look at this. I find this fascinating. We're going to tackle the first one, Genesis 12, verse 10 to 20, which is page 23 now. Flip to page 23.
Yep, I'm there.
Okay, this is a picture of the future from the present.
No, okay.
It's amazing. Okay, now remember, Moses is telling this story to the children of Israel about Pharaoh, or about Abraham going down to Egypt. And where did they just leave? Egypt. See if this sounds familiar in your Bible knowledge. A famine causes a move to Egypt. There is a sojourn, or a temporary time of life in Egypt. The beauty, or the same word, blessing, is sought after, envied, and then a problem. They were treated well because of favor with Pharaoh, but then disease resulted as God plagued the Egyptians. Pharaoh gave orders about Abraham to his men. They sent him on his way with his wife and everything he had. An alternative translation of this would be, Pharaoh chased him out of Egypt. Sent him on his way is a nice way to say he chased him out. Now, what does this sound like, you Israelites in the desert right now? What does this sound like? Right? So, right? Moses is giving the people of Israel a picture of what just happened to them, but it's like a pre-echo of what Abraham went through.
Here we go again.
Same thing Abraham did. Okay, this is a picture or a prefiguration of Abraham as the father of Israel and Yahweh's deliverance. So Israel, looking for their identity, says, your father, your patriarch, went through the same thing. And now you guys just had the same. You are Abraham. And God miraculously saved you and sent you away with a blessing. I mean, what happened when they left? All the Egyptians gave them everything they could think of. Get out of here. Right? There's some literary nuances that tie these two stories together. Beyond the obvious references to Egypt in the narrative, the phrases are a reverse echo of the sojourn in Egypt. What a beautiful, fair woman you are. Okay? In a reverse echo of Joseph, who was well-built and handsome, or fair. Genesis 39:6. The antiphon, okay, a literary work found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, touted Sarah's beauty. But seriously, she was old, indicating the epic nature of this narrative. We don't know for sure because, again, the timeline seems screwed up, so we don't know how old Sarah was at this time. 60 to 70s, okay? You go, wow. She didn't have Isaac until she was 90, okay? But again, you get that sense of epic on there. And it's the same words used to describe Sarah as used to describe Joseph. Remember, Joseph was supposed to be handsome and fair, and just like Sarah was described. My life, my birth, will be spared because of you, Abraham says. My birth will be hid because of you. A reverse echo of Moses. What Moses' mother did for him, placing him in the reeds. Okay, my birth will be spared because of you. Or my birth will be hid because of you. Abraham acquired, a whole bunch of stuff it says, camels. This is one of the instances where, if Abraham is dated to 2000 BC, camels would not have been domesticated yet. 1400-ish BC would have been more likely. But also Moses is telling the story, and it may have been actual camels given to Abraham, but Moses was telling of the great wealth in his time, and a lot of camels meant wealth. Okay, so Moses is telling the story at around 1200 BC, generally speaking, is when when the Exodus is considered. So he's saying Abraham had all this wealth. He had thousands of camels when he left. Now, we argue about whether camels were domesticated in 2000 or 14,000. Well, that it might be a moot point, because all Moses is trying to say is he was very rich. It's kind of like us saying, you know, he had 500 pieces of 8. Now, we don't have pieces of 8 anymore. And everybody thinks, well, they date what I just said because I referred to pieces of 8, but I may have just been referring to an idiom or a phrase of the wealth of someone. So, again, that really doesn't help date Abraham at 2000 or 1400. But anyway. The Lord, Yahweh, inflicted serious diseases on Pharaoh. Now that's in the Genesis 12 passage. An alternative translation from Fox, if you remember your Fox translation, Yahweh plagued Pharaoh with many plagues. That's what the Israelites heard. Yahweh plagued Pharaoh with many plagues, just as he did with them. The Egyptian literary theme, there are no less than 25 stories, tell of a disease or plagues happening because the Egyptians interacted or intermarried with the wrong people. There's at least, I've found, 25 different stories of disease or plagues caused in Egypt because they intermarried or they related to the wrong type of people. So from the Egyptian version, which may be exactly describing the Exodus, they have these stories of Egypt is plagued because they got the wrong people. The wrong people are here. They even call them lepers, or they call them the diseased people. They got to push them out. And that may be the Egyptian equivalent of the Hebrew Exodus story. Because there's at least 25 of them there, so there's got to be some kind of a seed of truth in there as they go through. All right? So, one of these crazy narratives, now we're starting to get what's behind it. They're giving them a picture in the present of what just happened. And of course, in the future, because Israel hasn't quite gotten the reward yet, right? They're still wandering around in the desert heading toward the promised land. Abraham made it back to the promised land afterwards. All right, flip the page. Let's tackle the tougher one. This one's a little bit tougher. The Battle of the Fathers, page 24. A picture of the God's promise. Genesis 20 and 26. Now, Genesis 20 is part of the Abraham narrative. Genesis 26 talks about Isaac. Okay, so we're going to touch on Isaac a little bit. But before we get to that, I want to remind you again that names have significance. Before looking at it, what does Abraham mean? What does the name Abraham mean? Well, you already looked at it. The very first line there. Right? Father of a people, or exalted father, is Abram. To Abraham, father of many people, or blessed father. Okay, that was the name change. He's not just going to be the father of a people, or an exalted father. He's going to be the father of many peoples, or many nations, and blessed father. Remember, his name is going to be synonymous with being blessed. Now we have this new character, Abimelech. You can just say it that way. Abimelech is probably the more correct pronunciation. Abimelech is what I grew up with. Abimelech, or Abimolech, or Abimelech, has a couple of possible meanings. Abi, again, means father.
I'm a father.
But father of what? One usage of Melech is king. Okay? So Abimelech is the father of kings. There's also names in Gerar literature of Bene-Melech, meaning son of a king. Ben means son. Ben-Jamin means son of Jamin. All right? So you have Abimelech and Beni-Melech, father of kings and son of kings, as very common names at the time. Abimelech could also mean father of MLK. Remember, in Hebrew there's no vowels. So it was later that those vowels were added. So you have the MLK, which is Canaanite deity we know as Moloch. Have you heard of the deity Moloch? All right. So the role is reversed, and the name would actually mean Moloch is Moloch. Moloch is my father. Okay. So the name could also mean Moloch is my father, as opposed to father of Moloch. Abimelech is a common name in the Bible outside the Abraham narrative and Isaac encounter. Judges 9, Abimelech becomes a judge after Gideon. One of the sons of Abiathar the priest is Abimelech in those two passages. He's also the king of Gath in Psalm 34. This is a picture. The battle of the two names is a picture of God's blessing over other nations. Father versus father, or follower versus follower, or blessing versus curse. So the names themselves signify Abi-Raham or Abi-Melech are fighting each other. Okay, Abi-Raham or Abi-Melech, father of many nations, or father of kings, or father of Molech, okay, are fighting each other. Okay, so comparing, what you have then is a comparing of Abimelech, Abimelech versus Abraham, and then also versus Isaac, which is an enhancement on the Abraham story. So let's look at the two. Look at page 25. And I'm going to summarize Genesis 20 and Genesis 26. Okay? Now a summary of Genesis 20 and Genesis 26. Abraham and Abimelech, and then the next column, Isaac and Abimelech. Okay, they stayed in Gerar, verse 1. Stayed in Gerar, verse 6, with Isaac. Said of his wife, she is my sister. Verse 2, said of his wife, she is my sister. Verse 7. God told Abimelech in a dream that she was Abraham's wife. Verse 6. Abimelech saw Isaac caressing Rebekah and knew she was no sister. Now that's a euphemism, okay? You understand the caressing I put in quotes there is a euphemism? All right, so that'd be very obvious they were not brother and sister, unless there's something weird going on. Abimelech says, what have you done to us? Verse 9. Abimelech says, what have you done to us? Verse 10 in Genesis 26. Abraham says back, they will kill me because of my wife. In verse 11. Isaac said, I might lose my life because of her. Verse 9. Abimelech, now here comes the change. Abimelech gave to Abraham sheep, cattle, slaves, 1,000 shekels of silver, 25 pounds of silver. Abraham prayed for healing because Abimelech was struck with a disease and was with barrenness, okay, which is an unusual twist from Sarah being barren to now Abimelech being barren. Okay, and that's where this happens after the Isaac narrative. Isaac's already born, so you see the sense of the barrenness moving from one to the other, the blessing moving from one Abi-Raham to Abi-Melech. They cross. Blessing and curse crosses. Now, Abraham was cursed with no children and not much money, and now he is blessed with children and lots of money. Abimelech is now barren and without the blessing, the money, and literal blessing. So that you can just see the transition happening here from one father to another father.
Is this a case of actions speak louder than words to these people?
Yeah, I think they'd see it that way too. Okay. Then on the Isaac side, Abimelech kept a keep-away notice to all his people. Okay, he didn't initially give Isaac a ton of stuff, according to verse, I didn't put it on there. Shoot, I'm sorry, I quit putting the verses on there afterwards. So it has to be after verse 9. Abimelech gave a keep-away notice. He said, stay away from these people. He allowed them to live in the land, but then told his people to stay away. And then Isaac reaped 100-fold on the land that Abimelech gave him, on the land that Abimelech allowed him to stay. Suddenly he reaped 100-fold on it.
Come out smelling like a rose.
Right, 100-fold. And then Abimelech came back to him and pleaded for a treaty with him. Pleaded to say, hey, you're just too big, too powerful. And again, you have the crossing of blessing and curse from Abiraham to Abimelech. And now this instance from Isaac to Abimelech and back. So the curse went from one to the other. And the blessing went from the one to the other. Again, it's a microcosm of God's promise. You shall be blessed and be blessed by others. It's a microcosm of God's promise. You shall be a great nation. Okay? So there is more depth behind these stories. The first one is a picture of what happened in Egypt. The next two, the one with Abraham and Isaac, are an enhancement of that cross of the promise and the curse, crossing each other. The curse leaving Abraham and going to Abiraham to Abimelech, and then the blessing going from Abimelech to Abraham. Okay, it's a picture of the crossing. And again, it's exactly what Israel saw at that time too, right? Because they were being cursed by the Egyptians. They were being oppressed by them. And then what happened as they left? Now they are the people of the blessing. The Egyptians are the people of the curse. Okay, so what they're seeing is not these non-chosen people. The blessing and the cursing is crossing each other. It's a microcosm of what's happening. Again, they're establishing the identity of the Israelites, right? They're establishing their identity. First, your father Abraham went through the same thing you guys did in Egypt. It was a microcosm of what you went through. But also Abraham and Isaac had the same thing you went through. They had this crossing of blessing. You are the blessed people, and the blessing is passing from these other nations to you, and the curse is passing from you to these other nations. That's what Israel wanted to see in these stories. Okay? All right, flip to the last page here. I think it's the last page. Page 26. Now remember, this is all part of a chiasm. Right? This is all part of a chiasm. You wonder why these stories are in the order they are, to fit this chiasm. And then remember, they're all pointing toward that central focus. So you start with the genealogy of Terah, you end with the genealogy of Nahor. Then you had the spiritual odyssey begins, and B2 at the bottom, the end of the spiritual odyssey. C1 is where we are. Sarah in a foreign palace, Israel in a foreign land. C2, Sarah in another foreign palace, or Israel in another foreign palace. They each have their point in the narrative as they're building the drama towards the main focus. Then Abraham comes to rescue Lot, comes to rescue Sodom and Lot. We're going to talk about that in 2 weeks. And then the covenant with Ishmael, the covenant of Isaac, the Annunciation of Isaac, all drawn to the focus where Abraham's name is changed. From Abram to Abraham, a great father to a father of many nations, a blessed father. Okay? And you see that crossing of the cursing and the blessing. It's crossing from other nations to Abraham and his people. So that's the whole focus of the narrative. And you see how these two stories keep us focused on that and bring us even closer to that. So the author begins to define who Abraham or who Israel is. Israel is the handicapped, the fearful wanderer. That's who they are. God turns that fearfulness, that handicap, into a blessing. That curse into a blessing. Those that seem in control and blessed are going to bow to Israel or deal with that barrenness and that disease, that crossing of blessing and cursing. It's going to happen. That's what Israel is starting to see. They're starting to figure out their identity as they do this. Okay, so I already answered my first question there. So what can we draw from that? That's what they heard, sitting on their evenings in the desert, right, in their 40 years of wandering. So what do we draw from that? What can we draw from that today?
That even when things seem to be going negatively for us, we are blessed and chosen and ultimately, that is our destiny,
Yeah.
not.
And just because God is not working where I think He should work, that doesn't mean He's not working. Or in my life.
Exactly.
I go with God. Because it's a statement here that Abraham says, there's no fear of God in this place. Well, that's from your perspective.
Yeah.
You haven't seen the total picture, you got your so high standard.
Yeah. There's still a lot of literary nuances in there that we really haven't touched or haven't had the time to touch. Because Abraham says to Abimelech, when the gods sent me wandering again. And it's a kind of like a phrase that I want to be able to relate to you that you can understand, because that's a common theme, that gods send you wandering on these epic journeys.
Sure.
And Abraham said that to Abimelech. I've been on this epic journey, basically. Okay, again, that covering of the epic on top of the historical narrative.
God has to put up with so much crap. Gee, I don't know how He does it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Very true. Very true. So, the pictures, you get the two pictures though, right? One is a microcosm of God's exodus, leading His people out of Israel, blessing them. And the other is this crossing of blessing and curses between the two nations. The promised people, the chosen people, and the others. Now for us, we're going, where's our blessing?
Yeah.
I think the application to us is in eternity for sure, in Jesus.
Amen.
Okay? That's when that crossing, it seems like we're cursed, but the blessing is coming. The blessing is coming. And that's the beautiful side of this as we today can read further in Scripture and see the fulfillment of this promise. All right? Yeah.
That's good.
God uses cracked pots,
Yeah.
right?
I knew when you said that.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
What was God's response to when Abraham did that? You remember the narrative? We're not going to read it, but I think most of the time, what ended up happening at the end of it?
Well,
There's one in Genesis 12 and one in Genesis 20. The one with Pharaoh and the one with Abimelech.
Yeah, he always got sent away with more than he came in.
More than he came with. How weird is that? He's the one who lied and was unfaithful and everything, and both Pharaoh and Abimelech sent him away with tons of stuff. Say, here, take my money, leave. Right? It's just kind of weird. So what do you think is, you know me now, the Egyptian connection in here? Other than the obvious Pharaoh one, do you see any other Egyptian connection in this story?
There's got to be a connection there. If you just ask it, there's got to be a method to your madness. I know it. I just don't know what it is.
Yes, there does.
Well,
We're going to talk about that in a minute. But
It said he went there because there was a famine.
What does that remind you of?
Joseph's.
Yeah, Joseph's
like
family
coming
went
there.
went to Egypt. Egyptians, especially Coptic Christians in Egypt, call themselves the refuge of God's people. Whenever there are problems, they run to Egypt.
Yeah.
Not only Abraham, but Joseph and Jacob and Jesus, Mary and Joseph. We are the refuge of God's people, they say. Now there's another one in the Isaac narrative, which we'll just touch on. Isaac does the same thing with the same name of a king. We don't believe it's the same king. Probably the next generation of Abimelech. Okay, it's a very common name, but Isaac does the same thing. Do you think there's a connection there between Abram and his son? Maybe a generational kind of sin or a generational kind of thing?
Yeah. A lot of similarities.
Yeah.
Well, it says the Bible we pass on.
What
That's a Hollywood
that's what
version.
we're looking at, right? And then Genesis 20, which is the Abimelech version, what we hear on the surface in this strange passage, Abraham does it again. A second time, doesn't he learn?
Right.
Abimelech is the righteous one, and Abraham is not the righteous one. Abraham again shows insecurity, being scared, being faithless. And Abraham again cashes in on the deal. The whole chapter 20 is there. But there's a few questions that make you go, wait a minute. That's the surface reading of all of this, but there's something that makes you think there's something a little deeper. Why would these passages be included in the narrative? Right? Again, if you, our whole point of this whole Sunday school, this whole series, is to figure out what they thought back then, and then translate that into something that we can apply to us today, right? What did they think of it back then? Why? So there's a couple of really crazy or strange narratives in this Abraham cycle. Both are the same, and you'd think Abraham would learn, where he keeps trying to sell his sister, or his wife as his sister, and keeps trying to say that, no, keep me safe. It almost sounds like it's something weird.
It sounds like a used car salesman sometimes.
So why did he do it? Why? Why is this in the narrative?
My personal opinion, unbiased, I think he thought he was smarter than God.
Okay.
He was a crafty individual. Always promoting himself, running ahead of God,
Okay.
forcing God's will. What do you think?
I feel like maybe, well, I don't know, maybe God put it in there to let us, because,
Learn from. You know.
well, and see that, he can use imperfect people, because
Oh,
that really strikes me
yeah.
through this
Yeah.
book.
Using imperfect people.
And I'm
That's-
grateful for
As I
that.
told him sometimes, inadvertently or deliberately or unconsciously.
Yeah. All right, so we're going to pick apart this passage, and I'm going to dispel everything you just said.
All right, tell me where you're at.
All right, page 22. So just flip the page here. You're on 21 right
Oh,
there.
okay.
So flip to page 22. In Genesis 12, verse 10 to 20, what we hear on the surface of this strange passage, on the surface. First we hear that Abraham left Canaan. Okay, Abraham lies about his wife.
Mm-hmm.
Abraham is insecure, scared, faithless, which doesn't sound like the father or the patriarch, right? Abraham cashes in on the deal, right? Trading sex with wife for goods.
Jeez.
Abraham gets caught because of the sickness caused by this sin. Okay?
You mean God allows people to be sick with his sin?
Interesting. Okay, that's the surface kind of reading. That's kind of